Hello and good morning everyone, and thanks for joining us today. So my name is Amy Hammond and I work in the marketing team at Bytes, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Dan Wright-Green from Bytes. We've got Mark Norton from AWS and then also Byron Beresford from Spot Instances, who will all be presenting the webinar for you today. And between them, they'll be discussing AWS Spot Instances in detail and our AWS Spot Managed Service.
Thanks very much, Amy. Good morning, everybody. Hope you're well. Thanks very much for joining the webinar this morning. So as Amy said, the purpose of this webinar is to talk about Spot Instances, i.e. what they are, how you can benefit from using them, but also to talk around what services we can provide to actually help you manage Spot far easier, make it more accessible, and ultimately enable you to have a way in which you can reduce your costs on an ongoing basis, with a little bit of a different approach to perhaps some of the other optimization services out there. So just to kind of cover off what we're going to talk about today, I'm just going to give you a quick introduction to Bytes AWS Services, who we are, what we do, what our approach is. I'm going to make that as brief as possible. I'm then going to hand over to Mark at AWS, who's going to give you an overview of Spot, and hopefully make things crystal clear for those of you that have never used Spot before or haven't heard of it. And then Mark is going to hand over to Byron at Spot Inst, who's going to talk around what Spot Inst is, and ultimately enable you to understand, hopefully, how we can deliver a service to you which will enable you to utilize Spot very quickly.
Dan, I need to put it on reading view. Yeah, there we go.
There we go. Cool. Right. So Bytes AWS Services is a new division of Bytes, which was launched way back in September now. So fairly new. You know, we're in our infancy as far as the actual division is concerned, but we've been working with AWS now for the past 2 years, and we've been spending that time very much understanding what works, what doesn't work, and ultimately using all of that knowledge and experience to design and build a team and division which can deliver a set of services to our customers and give you as much value as possible around AWS. So the team today consists of the usual suspects. We've got, you know, our consultants and technical architects who have various different capabilities and areas of expertise within the AWS platform. We've got a project management team, we've got an ops management team, but the key differentiator which we wanted to build into the team from the very get-go was the business analyst. Now, we feel bringing the business analyst team within Bytes AWS Services really enables us to not only focus on the technical delivery and optimization of AWS, but also the commercial business-minded side of things as well. So those guys bring something very different to the table, which perhaps you might not see provided by services from other partners and consultancy firms out there. So our core focus and the core set of services that we provide is very much geared around increasing your visibility and control and security of the platform, whilst also reducing your costs as best as possible through driving optimization and efficiencies. So we achieve that through providing a managed service which is powered by Cloud Health. For those of you that have heard of it or may have not heard of it, it's a cloud management tool which was actually recently acquired by VMware, perhaps demonstrating, you know, the strength of that tool. You know, we very much see it as one of the most capable AWS management tools out there, and thus we decided to use Cloud Health as the basis and the core underpinning of our service. You know, the key areas in which we utilize that tool and the service to drive efficiency within your estate around cost analysis. So we show you what you're using, where, when, and how much does it cost. We enable you to understand very clearly and quickly what potential security concerns there may be within your estate, and enable you to have a simple way to address those and remediate those as quickly as possible. But outside of that, we also really look to drive automation and set up various different orchestrated actions which will enable you to take away some of the heavy lifting of cloud management, and ultimately give you a lot more time to actually do the good stuff, driving that innovation and getting working on new projects, etc. And as well as optimizing what you've already got, we very much look to build in those efficiencies from the get-go for any new projects that you have. So ultimately, we enable you to utilize AWS in its most trim form, and keep your costs down as best as possible. So the core service is actually split into various different flavors. We've got Cloud Report, Cloud Optimize, and Cloud Ignite, which are our standard services. Now, Cloud Report is very much focused, as you can see on this table, on financial reporting, and ultimately enabling you to have a simple billing mechanism whereby Bytes will invoice you for your AWS usage on a monthly basis, while also giving you a lot more visibility as to what's going on, and enabling you to use that visibility to get more control over your environment. Cloud Optimize comes in where we actually start then delivering a layer of optimization services above the reporting services. So on a monthly and quarterly basis, we'll proactively utilize cloud health and the experience of our business analysts and technical architects to identify a set of recommendations which we feel you could make as a business within your environments to reduce your costs. And that can be achieved via various different means, the kind of usual suspects, usual suspects, such as right sizing of machines, looking at EBS volumes which may be provisioned within your estate but aren't actually being used, through to the kind of more commercial aspects of cost optimization, such as reserved instances. And Cloud Ignite comes in where we can make these recommendations to you, but as a business, your team may not have sufficient resource. You may have projects which must take a priority, and may actually result in you not actually being able to act on those recommendations, and therefore you can continue spending more than you could, or spending more than you should be within your estate. So Cloud Ignite delivers a technical architect as a service on top of the Cloud Health platform, and what that means in simple terms is we provide you with a consultant or an architect who can work with your delivery teams to ratify and implement the recommendations that we're making, which enables you to drive your costs down as quickly as possible without detracting your delivery teams from the more important tasks which may be going on within your business. Hopefully this slide illustrates quite nicely the kind of cost savings which are possible through using our Cloud Report, Optimize or Ignite services. So we feel by using Cloud Report, just through gaining that visibility of your environment, you tend to be able to reduce your costs by a small margin. So on average, you might be able to get your costs down by 10%. Through using Cloud Optimize, because we're making those proactive recommendations, your average cost savings would tend to look towards 20%, and Ignite as well. You're looking at about 20 to 30% on average. And I can actually say from the analysis we've conducted recently across around about 4 million in annual consumption, we're looking at an average cost saving potential of about 39% at the moment. Now, not all of that can necessarily be implemented today, but on average, we feel you could probably drive about 60% of that. So, I think between 20 and 30% using Cloud Optimize or Ignite is a realistic representation of the potential cost savings. As you can see at the top of the mountain, we have Bytes Spot Services. Now, Spot is a great way to reduce your costs. For those of you who don't know what Spot is, I'm going to hand over to Mark in a second, who will outline that. But fundamentally, it's a great way to reduce the footprint, the financial footprint of your AWS consumption across EC2. And a lot of the time, you can drive your costs down by as much as 80%, which is far greater than the discounts that you can obtain via the more standard commercial means such as reserved instances. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Mark, who's going to talk about Spot, what it is and why it's important.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Right, okay. Everyone can see my screen. So I'm going to cover quite a lot over the next 10 minutes, and I'm not expecting everyone to be an expert on the AWS platform. So if you do have questions, please add them to the chat window. And if there's any areas that I'm discussing where you'd like me to go into more detail and dive a little deeper after the session, I'd be more than happy to do so. So Spot Instances help you save time and money. So just a few headlines from customers before I go into more detail on what Spot is and how it's possible for these people to save a lot of money on their cloud computing costs. Typically just by following a few best practices when architecting, and sometimes just with a simple line or two change of code to actually gain the benefit. So Lyft, some of you may know them. So they save 75% on their EC2 cloud computing costs. Lyft is a ride-share taxi firm, and a particular use case here was they were using Jenkins for the orchestration of their continuous integration pipeline, with Jenkins managing the build, test, and automation process. Now, they were deploying code using a lot of compute resource, leading to high costs when they were using on-demand instances at scale. And just by changing a few lines of code allowed them to switch everything over to Spot Instances, which gave them a pretty much instant 75% reduction on that workload cost. Yelp, online search engine for local services, they transferred their Hadoop cluster. They started using Elastic MapReduce, and they were able to scale their workloads cost effectively from 2 days to just 30 minutes, so benefiting from faster results and cost reduction by being able to use more resource for the same money. Illumina, they use Spot Instances to perform high-intensity genomic sequencing. They have customers that read and understand the genetic variations on their platform. And they were basically able to gain 75% cost reduction again, and with the availability of more resource they had on than they had on their on-premise system, they could scale very easily for those customers. Okay, so what are Amazon EC2 Spot Instances? Basically, spare compute capacity on the AWS cloud at steep discounts compared to on-demand. Spot Instances let you save up to 90%, and are ideal for workloads such as big data, containers, CI/CD, high-performance computing, and any other fault-tolerant workload. They allow you to scale your workload throughput by up to 10 times and stay within your existing budget by simply adding more instances at the same price that you would have paid for the lesser quantity of on-demand instances. For Amazon EC2 Spot, you have, or for EC2, you have 3 purchase options. On demand, you pay for the compute resource when you require it, with no long-term commitments. Reserved instances, so you make a 1 or 3 year commitment and receive a significant discount for that commitment over the on-demand pricing. And then finally, Spot Instances. So as I said, spare EC2 capacity at steep discounts, with a caveat that we will take the instance back if required for an on-demand capacity with a 2-minute warning. Now, I'll show you details of how to manage these interruptions in a few moments. Okay, so why Spot Instances? As I mentioned, you can benefit from up to 90% discount on demand. So faster results. Typically, if you have a fixed time scale or a budget for a project, if you could get the resource that much cheaper and spin up a larger number of instances to enable you to get the job done faster, well, why not? And we've had many customers spinning up over 1 million concurrent vCPUs on Spot to speed up results. I suppose that also gives you an example of the size of the compute capacity available for the Spot markets. Spot is super easy to use. It's integrated with many of the AWS services, such as Elastic Container Service, Elastic Kubernetes Service, AWS Batch, Elastic MapReduce, and many more, but also with the popular third-party services out there in the market. Okay. So a couple of points I want to highlight here. The first one, top left, auto-scaling. In October, we launched the mixed auto-scaling groups, where you can combine on-demand, RIs, and Spot instances in a single auto-scaling group. A large majority of our enterprise accounts are using auto-scaling, and this is a game changer for them, meaning they can easily benefit from the advantages of using Spot in their instance mix. Just by changing stuff in the console, they can start spinning up Spot instances and saving money there. Also on this slide, you can see a whole bunch of the third-party Spot integrations that we have, enabling customers to easily benefit from the use of Spot. So what are the rules of EC2 Spot? Quite simple, really. The infrastructure is the same as the reserved instances and the on-demand instances. The same choice of regions, the same choice of availability zones. It's basically the same compute. Spot pricing is set by a market rate by AWS and fluctuates very, very seldomly. For those of you that know the Spot market and have known Spot for some time, you'll remember having to bid for the resource. And in theory, you could outbid another company for that resource. Actually, since late 2017, this is not the case. Bidding has been removed. So if the resource is available, you can have it for the discounted market price, and it would only be revoked if that instance was required for on-demand capacity, and that particular instance type has become available in that particular availability zone. You can still, however, set a maximum price that you're willing to pay in the console. So if you have budget constraints, you'd never pay more than that figure. You basically lose the resource if the market price went above that. And it's worth noting as well that you'd never pay more than the on-demand price for a Spot instance. Diversify your instance types. This is probably my #1 piece of advice for building Spot instance fleets. So diversify across instance families, instance types, and across availability zones if you can. For those of you that know the AWS instance families, example of this, if you were using, let's say, the M4 4x large instance, or the C4 4x large instance, you could quite easily use the M4 4x large instance. Simply having more memory shouldn't affect you running the application. Then also being able to diversify across different series, so either the 5 or the 3 series instance families, would allow you to diversify further. So by using more resource rather than locking yourself to one particular instance type enables you to maximize your coverage on the Spot market. So, getting started with Spot. If your application is stateless, fault tolerant, loosely coupled, and can be flexible on instance type, seriously consider integrating with Spot instances. Lean on Spot for big data, and I mentioned this before, continuous integration, continuous delivery, web services, HPC, and last but not least, containerized workloads. If you're running containers on AWS, you really should be using Spot. So I talked about interruptions earlier and us taking resource back. The truth is that there's minimal interruptions out there, with over 95% of instances being interrupted or reclaimed in the last 3 months, meaning that the jobs were completed and the instances were terminated by the users and not by us. And I can tell you it was the same for the previous 3 months as well. There are certain instances that are prone to interruptions, such as GPU instances. And if you're let's say you're moving on to the latest generation of instances, so some of the latest Gen 5 instances, as soon as they become available, it's probably best not using those on Spot, because a lot of people move over to the latest and greatest. The main piece of advice here is to look at what your application can run on and potentially use some of the older generations, because more and more of those have become free, and you can use them freely in the Spot market. So as long as your application is fault tolerant and you can diversify, then you're set for Spot. The 2-minute warning. So then, given the 2-minute warning for instance termination, you can then checkpoint, drain the elastic load balancer, and spin up another Spot instance. We even have a stop-start function now. So if your application is stateful, you can hibernate that instance until the instance is available again and pick up where you left off. and when the instance comes back online. So similar to opening, closing the lid on your laptop. Also, I suggest looking at Spot Instance Advisor. I don't know if you've seen this, but you can find it on the web or in the AWS console, and this helps you determine, based on historic data, the best instance types and those instance types that are getting reclaimed and the frequency of those interruptions. So you'll see many of these details as an average of less than 5% reclaim rate. This is obviously a good place to start if you're building your Spot fleet of instances. Okay, another example of our customer Spot workloads here. So containers are often stateless and fault tolerant, so a perfect match for Spot. Skyscanner, the travel fare aggregator website, many of you may know, moved their flight pricing system across all our regions to Spot and realized 74% saving overnight. They've successfully been doing this since the middle of last year. So if you're thinking that Spot was only for dev test environments, think again. We've got many big customers running their production workloads on Spot as well. So also, if you're running big data workloads, you should be really well placed to run your workloads on Spot, enabling you to be able to cost effectively scale to a large number of parallel nodes. Mobileye is an example of this. They're an Intel company now, and they develop self-driving technologies in the cloud for autonomous vehicles. They run large transient clusters with AWS batch, running over 200,000 cores for a few days at a time, meaning they can scale up and down much more cost effectively than they were able to do in their own data center before switching over to AWS and utilizing EC2 Spots. And then finally, to finish up, to give you a visual on some of the vertical markets that our customers are using and benefiting from optimizing Spot instances. Now, I know that I've covered a lot in this session, so obviously if there's any questions that you have, I'll be happy to help. If there's any need for a discovery workshop or something to see where Spot could fit into your workloads, let's sync up with the Bytes team and have that conversation. That's it. Thank you very much.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining. My name is Byron Beresford. I represent the Solutions Architect team here in the UK for Spotins. And for those that are listening to a recording, we're going to talk today about how Spotins enables organizations to consume the excess capacity in the public cloud, specifically today around AWS and their EC2. So just to give a background, typically at any point in time, there's approximately 50% or more excess capacity running in the public cloud environments. So specifically in AWS, we call these Spot instances, but also additionally in Azure and Google, we have low priority VMs and preemptible VMs. Now, the benefits to this excess capacity is that it's much cheaper to run, as we've already alluded to. Typically, you get anywhere from 60 to 90% discount. Now, one of the benefits of that is it makes it much cheaper for you to run. But then we also have to think about how we consume that and how we utilize that. We have to maybe look into our application sets and make them highly available, or indeed have a look at the fact that we haven't got an SLA associated with that from those public cloud vendors. So what Spotins does is it give you that SLA to allow you to run different types of workloads and also make it much, much easier for you to accommodate and adopt that excess capacity. So how does it do it? So Spotins, with our customers and our customer base, look at the data, the historical trends that have happened within the Spot markets, and effectively run some predictive algorithms to determine when particular Spot instances and the types of Spot instances that are going to disappear, and then allow us to do something with that. So if we think about in AWS, you get a 2-minute interruption. So AWS will tell you that a Spot instance is going to disappear, and then you've got to spin up another Spot instance to take that workload. Now, the difficulty with that is 2 minutes is not a very long time, but additionally, it can happen at any point in time. So what Spotins does is looking at that historical data, it allows us to inform the customer much more effectively. We also can take those workloads down and then spin other ones up. Now, you can imagine the different use cases for this, from containers to stateful instances to things like EMR, etc. Take that one step further. When an instance becomes available, when that Spot market becomes available again, we can actually not only spin up additional instances, but we can also migrate on demand or indeed reserve instances back to Spot instances. So this effectively allows you to run your applications and services the most effective way on that excess capacity. Now, we tightly couple into many different applications, such as containers, Kubernetes, stateful applications, and indeed load balancers and web services as well. So you get an effective cluster management tool to allow you to consume and integrate with your applications and services as much as possible, giving an underlying SLA. That SLA means that if a Spot instance is no longer available and that market is diminished, then we can actually spin up those on-demand or reserve workloads for you. So your application stays up and line and you get that same SLA that you would expect to get from those on-demand instances. To give you a background, Spot is currently managing over 2 billion compute hours. Now, that's quite a lot of compute hours that we're running per month at the moment. And typically, as we've said and agree with AWS, that cost reduction is anywhere from 60 to 80%. Some customers indeed even getting 90%. We only charge a percentage of those savings, so you never pay more than what you're already paying within your particular public cloud bill. Now, that represents approximately 450,000 VMs at any point in time that we're managing. I think it actually might even be as high as 500,000 now. This slide deck might be slightly out of date. So how does it work? Let's look at the different application sets. So you've got your containers, your Rancher, Kubernetes, ECS and AKS, etc. And you've got some of your monolithic instances and applications. So whether we're talking about stateful instances or indeed talking about Beanstalk or load balancers or indeed EMR. And we've created something called Spot Elastic Group. This is your cluster manager. And this does something on the bottom. This allows us to consume the on-demand, the Spot, and the reserve instances. And this also includes all the analytics and the trend analysis and the predictive artificial intelligence to spin up the right type of instances for you. But incorporated into that, you get, from a containers perspective, you get auto healing. We're looking at those particular nodes, making sure they're healthy and running your pods correctly. We also can increase the amount of nodes within that cluster itself. So if a new pod's to be deployed, then we can deploy the correct type of instance. Obviously running majority on Spot where possible, but additionally, if needed, we can run that on the different type of instances such as on demand. We move that to the traditional side of things and you've got your load balancer integration. We can work across multiple regions so you can give yourself high availability. And indeed, we've also got the blue-green deployments for rolling updates, etc. Now, how would you integrate into Elastic Group? You can do it through our standard UI. It's a nice SaaS-based solution, very easy to consume. But we know developers like working with infrastructure as code, and that's where we've adopted, and we are a provider within Terraform. We can also consume CloudFormation. You can utilize our API, we use our API ourselves for our UI, but additionally, you can also use our SDK such as Go and Python. We have a great GitLab repository there with great integrations and applications and services that you'll see people such as myself and the other SAs within Spotins add, and the community's growing all the time. Now, just to remember that although we are predominantly talking about AWS here, we also offer the same services for Azure and Google. Quick notes from a joint customer. We've got Ticketmaster on AWS, and they're currently consuming Terraform. Majority of their workloads are Kubernetes. They're combining both EC2 Spot and reserve and on demand all in one place, and it's all managed through Spotins. And a quick quote here from Joshua Burgin he's the general manager for AWS for EC2. And his quote here is very apt, and it says, Spot Services enables customers to move additional workloads to Spot instances with less effort and greater confidence. So we'll stop talking about pre-production workloads, development and test workloads, and we're specifically talking about production workloads here. So you can actually run your production mission critical applications and services on Spot instances, with Spotins managing that for you, giving you that same SLA. Quick recap on the use cases. We've talked about some of the web services. So typically you may have some web front ends and elastic load balancers mixed in with an auto scaling group. We can take that in and manage all that for you. We migrate over onto your CI/CD. So whether you're consuming Jenkins or Code Deploy or consuming Ansible or Chef, then we can integrate into all of those elements. Now with the stateful workloads, obviously if a Spot instance is about to disappear, spinning up another and migrating that workload with that stateful instance, it can be a very difficult task. And this is where the analytics and the AI comes in from Spotins, because we can preempt when an instance is going to disappear. We can spin up another, take a snapshot and migrate that workload and register it back to a load balancer per se, and get that up and running. Additionally, you can also continue to use Cloud Init or your user data to run any pre-scripts that need to be run as you spin up that workload. Now, we've already mentioned Kubernetes and cluster management, including ECS, but additionally, we also need to talk about how do we consume them? How do we look at them from a dashboard? And this is where Ocean comes into. So quickly spinning up to here. Ocean is Spot Instances state serverless manager. So where we've got container organizations such as Kubernetes and GKE and AKS, etc., Ocean will manage that for you in the same way that Elastic Group does. But additionally, it looks at it from an on-premise and give you some showback or chargeback based on what your workloads are on your on-premise, and tell you what it could look like in AWS, for instance. We're also picking the right type of instance types, so whether they're M4 larges or T2 smalls, to determine where those pods should be placed. So your cluster groups in your container management become the most effective. We typically move organizations to anything from 50 to 60% utilization to approximately 95%. And we're also looking at trend analysis. So if a workload spins up typically on a Friday, then we can preempt that and spin and put additional headroom within those clusters. So not only are you getting all the benefits of running them on Spot, you're also making your clusters much more efficient. And I think I'd just like to finish there with saying thank you very much for attending. If you've got any questions, please do email me at byron.beresford@spotinst.com. It would be great to hear from you. Thank you.
Thanks, Byron. I'm just going to pass back to Dan quickly now.
Thanks very much, Mark and Byron and Amy also. That was really useful. So just to clarify, we can provide the Spot management service either as part of our Cloud Ignite service tier, or we can provide it as a standalone service as well if you didn't want to opt for the fully fledged Cloud Ignite service. Let's say you wanted Cloud Report, but you also want to benefit from the Spot management service as well. We can absolutely do that. So for everyone that's joined the webinar today, we've secured an offer from both AWS and Spotinst that we can provide you. For anybody that would like to sign up to a free trial of Spot management, if you can sign up this month, we'll be able to provide you with a $500 AWS credit to cover the usage of the Spot instances, and our Spotinst powered service will also be available with a 30-day trial to fully enable you to understand the benefits of using both Spot and the service wrap as well. Normally we'd provide a 14-day trial, but as I said, if you can sign up this month, we'll be more than happy to extend that out to 30 days to give you a really good view as to how it could work for your business. And as Mark said, and that goes for Byron as well, you know, for anyone that's got any questions afterwards or would like to understand things in a bit more detail, you know, just reach out. We'll be more than happy to sit down with you, either on a call or a meeting or a workshop, to, you know, really run through which workloads you have, you know, may be eligible or viable to utilize Spot, and to work with you to actually get something in place to prove the technology, prove the service, and hopefully work towards getting it operational in production. So thanks very much. I guess just like to close off by opening up a Q&A.
Brilliant, thank you, Dan. Yep, so if you do have any questions, there is a questions box, which is just at the right-hand side of your screen. I'll read those out shortly as they come through. Okay, so it doesn't look like we've had any questions come through, so well done, guys. Looks like you covered everything off during the webinar. Oh, actually, sorry, one's come through. Let's just open that up. So there's one question here. Spotinst gives up to 5 minutes notice. What is the average and minimum time?
Hi there. So with Spotinst, we actually, because we're looking at the markets for each particular instance type in the availability zones, or even indeed in the different regions, we actually typically get around 15 minutes notification. That gives us about enough time to drain those instances if it's stateful, if you're using Kubernetes or some containers or even your CI/CD platforms, to migrate those workloads onto something else. We'll also do all the integrations with your load balancers and everything that you'd expect when we spin up those new instances. It can be much longer than that. We can actually get more than 15 minutes, but typically we offer a 15-minute SLA around that.
Brilliant, thank you. So just wait a couple more seconds, see if any come through. Okay, so I think that's it for today. So thank you everyone so much for taking the time out of your busy day to join our webinar, and thank you Dan, Mark and Byron for presenting the webinar today. As mentioned at the beginning, I will send you all the recording of the webinar. I'll try and do it this afternoon, but if not, it'll be definitely tomorrow morning. But yes, so there is a feedback form at the end as well. So if you're interested in any of the free trials, just pop that in there and we'll get back to you. It does say 14 days, but as Dan mentioned, we will we'll be happy to extend it to 30. Okay, so thank you everyone for joining and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.